After being bonded with the Venom symbiote, Matt Gargan becomes the new Amazing Spider-Man in Norman Osborn's Dark Avengers. What's up guys, Roman from R&S Entertainment here, and welcome to Comic History, the weekly video series where I retell and explain the iconic storylines, origins, and events in the world of comics. In today's episode, we're going to be covering the Sinister Spider-Man, where the second major host of the Venom symbiote, well, third if you count Angelo, and fourth if you count Spider-Man himself, Matt Gargan, formerly known as Spider-Man villain the Scorpion, has his big come-up when Norman Osborn, who following the events in Secret Invasion has taken over S.H.I.E.L.D. and created his own Dark Avengers team, repurposes Gargan as his own public Spider-Man. Matt Gargan had become Venom in Marvel Knight's Spider-Man following Eddie Brock selling the symbiote for charity after finding out that his terminal cancer had spread throughout his body, with small-time wannabe criminal Angelo Fortunato obtaining the symbiote for a brief time before it abandoned him in midair and left him to fall to his death. The symbiote senses Mac's enhanced genetic abilities and offers him great power if he joins with it, and Gargan becomes a new, increasingly unstable Venom that eats the limbs and sometimes entire bodies of his enemies. Despite all of this, Gargan as Venom is seen as a hero to the public, as he had been used as a member of the Thunderbolts, a team of villains being forced or manipulated to act as heroes, often serving to hunt down other villains or superheroes who had gone against the powers that be, especially during Civil War and the Superhero Registration Act, before being elevated by Norman Osborn to the new Hammer-approved Amazing Spider-Man. Enabled and empowered to do whatever he wants with seemingly no consequences, Matt Gargan is the Sinister Spider-Man. Our story begins with Matt Gargan as Spider-Man stopping a low-level supervillain calling himself General Wolfram from stopping a bank. Gargan enjoys the cheers from an adoring crowd of civilians, thinking to himself that being a superhero isn't actually that bad, and enjoying the perks of grabbing a few thankful girls' asses and making out with them before he goes. Getting General Wolfram in a headlock, Gargan swings away purportedly to arrest him. Taking Wolfram to a nearby roof instead, Gargan takes the duffel bag of stolen cash for himself and webs up Wolfram with the symbiote before saying that he's hungry, proceeding to violently devour one of Wolfram's arms as he screams in terror. Mac takes his newfound giant bag o' cash to a strip club where he proceeds to buy the company of a stripper, all while thinking back to his origin as Matt Gargan, private investigator, who was hired by J. Jonah Jameson to learn the secret identity of Spider-Man. Mac ended up becoming the Scorpion and getting thrown in prison, and Jonah ended up becoming the mayor of New York City. Now that Gargan had been fused to the Venom symbiote and had become a Dark Avenger, it was his time to put J. Jonah Jameson in his place. Jameson is confronted at a press conference with leaked information that crime under his term had risen 7%, leading to JJ rudely blowing off an appointment with a psychiatrist named Shep Gunderson, who has a plan to rehabilitate convicted supervillains, with Jameson saying that he needs crime stopped before it happens. Meanwhile, Mac takes the stripper home and has her dancing topless to AC/DC when Norman Osborn confronts him about the incident with Wolfram. Norman reprimands Gargan, telling him that he was to follow his orders and not interact with the public without his permission, and that he had caused problems with the police asking where the money went, or how Wolfram lost an arm. Max stares Osborn down, thinking to himself that Norman had just made his list. Sometime later, J. Jonah Jameson returns to his home to find the hooker Mac had been partying with murdered in his bed with blood all over the walls. As Mac's attention is focused on ruining Jameson's life, the psychiatrist who had approached Jameson earlier gathers together a group of villains who had all survived having their limbs eaten by the new Spider-Man, donning a mask himself and calling himself the Redeemer, declaring that they would hunt down Spider-Man and force him to atone for his evil ways. As Jameson deals with the dead hooker in his bedroom, Gargan as Venom meets with one of the city's largest gangs, crouching in a tree and eating a squirrel as he waits. Gargan then proceeds to orchestrate a gang war by manipulating two different gangs into thinking the other is after them, doing some of the dirty work himself by attacking gang members and claiming that the opposing gang had tipped him off. Mac beats the living hell out of the gang and in the process takes 3 blonde Daisy Duke wearing groupies from the gang's stash house, swinging away with them, content in knowing that the gang war he had started would cause Jameson a ton of trouble. With the crime rate skyrocketing, Jonah meets with Norman Osborn to plead with him to send JJ an Avenger to help with and become the public face of Jameson's war on crime. Smugly grinning and enjoying Jameson's begging, Norman says he knows just the hero. The book immediately transitions to J. Jonah Jameson addressing the public side by side for the first time with Spider-Man. As Jameson grovels to the public, Mac thinks to himself that he's almost done messing with Jameson's life, and is about to move on to ending it. Before he's able to, however, Mac goes as Spider-Man to respond to an apparent terrorist threat demanding that Spider-Man show up alone. When Mac arrives at the location, he finds the survivors group of villains led by the Redeemer, who demands that Spider-Man acknowledge and atone for his crimes through charity work and anger management classes. Instead, Mac proceeds to eat one of the villains, and when another leaps to grab him from behind, Mac's ass becomes another mouth to bite into him as well. With a supervillain literally shoved up his ass, Mac fights off the others and eats most of them, leaving the Redeemer with all of his limbs bitten off and only 2 of the others alive. Though they have clearly been beaten and eaten by Gargan, the Redeemer and his 2 remaining men send Jameson photographic evidence of Spider-Man eating people and orchestrating the gang war currently happening in New York. Jameson approaches Osborn with the evidence, though he's basically just told to fuck off, and afterwards makes a public appearance alongside Mac at a giant carnival being thrown to show unity in the city. Mac shows up late because he was busy getting the girls in the beauty contest to sleep with him, and interrupts Jameson's speech to a hail of cheers and panties being thrown onto the stage. At that point, Bullseye and Daken, who have both been functioning alongside Mac as Dark Avengers, are dispatched by Norman Osborn under their supervillain identities to kill Gargan, as he was beginning to be more trouble than he was worth. Bullseye looks around for the most fun thing he could kill someone with, and settles on a poodle, asking Daken which eye he should aim for. The book then devolves into a giant chaotic fight with Mac being impaled by projectile corn dogs, having an actual dog stuck in his eye, and the Redeemer-led villains along with the gangs from the gang war all jumping in to help the attempt at killing Gargan. Mac beats all of them unconscious, along with biting at least one arm off, and eventually J. Jonah Jameson fires a shotgun into the air to stop the chaos. When the chief of police notes that Spider-Man had defeated Bullseye, Daken, a group of supervillains, and the leaders of both major gangs in the city, he hails both Mac and Jameson as heroes, despite both of their selfish and immature motives. 2 days later at Avengers Tower, Mac lounges around as Norman tells him that Mac would learn to behave, or next time he'll suit up to kill him himself, to which Mac replies, "Anytime, cornrows." The book ends with Mac swinging through the city as the Sinister Spider-Man, multiple girls in tow, and no lesson learned other than if you start eating somebody, you finish the job. And that wraps up today's episode on The Sinister Spider-Man, a ridiculous joke book following Mac Gargan on his stint as a Dark Avenger during Dark Reign. I give Mac Gargan a lot of flack for being such a terrible replacement for Eddie Brock as the main host of Venom, mainly because it lasted so long until we got an infinitely better host in Flash Thompson, and then the eventual return to Eddie Brock that we have in the comics today. But I don't really dislike Mac as a character. As the Scorpion, and more so as a goofy D-list Spider-Man villain, he really works, and despite how blatantly terrible the Sinister Spider-Man is, I almost like it despite myself because it showcases Mac's character so well. He's a goon and a complete asshole, so it's kind of funny watching him be the main character for once. I may eventually cover more Mac Gargan Venom stories on Comic History in the future, but only when I'm in a weird mood, because this was not a highlight in the overall history of Venom. Before I wrap this video up, I want to announce for anyone who hasn't heard, I am starting up a new Venom show on YouTube called Eddie's Clubhouse, where we're going to be answering Venom, Symbiote, and Spider-Man questions, talking about classic Symbiote comics and stories, showing off some Venom merch and collectibles, and maybe even playing some Spider-Man themed games. If you want to send in questions to be answered on the show, make sure to send them in via my social media in the description box below with the hashtag Eddie's Clubhouse. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for weekly content on comics, movies, and more. Subscribe to my gaming channel, RNS Gaming, and if you want to help support the channel, make sure to go check out my Patreon. I want to give a huge thanks to Drew Miles for being a $10 patron this month, and I will see you all next time.